There are names carved not in stone, but in thunder. In the heart of ancient Rome, where blood was currency and honor was the only law, there walked men who defied defeat itself. They weren't born of privilege, nor forged in peace. They were molded by chaos, sharpened by war, and anointed by victory. When the world bent to the might of the eagle, these warriors stood at its core, unyielding, unbroken, unstoppable. They carried not just swords, but the weight of a civilization that refused to die. Every battle they fought was a symphony of precision and fury, every victory a chapter in the immortal tale of Rome. These were not mere soldiers, they were legends, the ones who never tasted defeat and whose shadows still march across history. There are moments in history when men transcend mortality, when their courage outlives their bones and their spirit outlasts the empire that birthed them. In the dawn of Rome, before marble turned to dust and glory turned to myth, there existed a breed of warrior whose hearts were carved from iron and whose resolve could not be bent, broken, or burned. They were the pulse of the empire, men who carried its destiny upon their shoulders like Atlas bearing the weight of the heavens. Their armor clanged not for pride, but for purpose. Their blades were not tools of conquest, but of conviction. For them, every dawn meant one thing, another chance to prove that Rome was eternal. You see, the invincible spirit of Rome was not found in her walls, her temples, or her gold. It lived in the veins of those who fought for her, men who bled not for themselves, but for the idea of Rome itself. That Rome was more than a place. It was a heartbeat that echoed through every soul willing to die before surrender. When the drums of war thundered across the hills, when the sky turned red and the earth quaked beneath the march of legions, these warriors stood still, calm, focused, unshaken. They did not see death as an enemy, only as a witness to their greatness. In the burning sands of Carthage, in the frozen mountains of Germania, in the endless dust of the East, they fought, sometimes outnumbered, often forgotten, but never defeated. Because defeat to them was not measured by the loss of land or the fall of men, it was measured by the loss of will, and their will was unbreakable. Their commanders knew this truth well. They did not build their armies from fear, but from faith. Faith in discipline and unity in the strength of 1,000 hearts beating as one. A Roman warrior did not stand for himself. He stood for the man beside him. He was his brother's shield, his empire's edge, his people's hope. And in that bond, they found something greater than survival. They found immortality. Imagine it, the heat of the battlefield, the smell of blood and smoke thick in the air, the screams of enemies fading beneath the relentless march of Roman steel. Yet in the center of that chaos, there is silence, a stillness born of certainty. The certainty that no matter how fierce the storm, Rome will stand. That was their gift. An unshakable faith that burned brighter than any fear. And that is why history still whispers their names. Not because they were perfect, but because they refused to break. They refused to yield. They refused to lose. Every scar on their armor was a verse in Rome's song of eternity. Every drop of blood was a testament that the human spirit, when fueled by purpose, can become invincible. They did not ask if they would live through the day. They asked only, will Rome remember me when I'm gone? And history answered, for these were the warriors who carried an empire on their backs, who faced the impossible and made it inevitable. Their spirit was Rome's spirit, the spirit that turned farmers into soldiers, soldiers into legends, into gods, and those sent to gods. And though centuries have buried their bones beneath the dust of time, their legacy remains unbroken. Because the invincible spirit of Rome never died. It simply changed its form. It lives wherever courage stands against fear. It lives wherever honor refuses to kneel. It lives in the hearts of those who, like them, will never lose the battle within. Legends are not born beneath gentle skies. They are born in storms, where lightning forges the brave and fire tempers the soul. Rome's greatest warriors did not begin as heroes. They began as boys, sons of farmers, shepherds, slaves, men who had nothing but hunger in their eyes and destiny whispering in their blood. From the moment they first gripped the sword, they learned that life would offer them no mercy. And so, they learned not to need it. In the camps outside the eternal city, the air was thick with discipline. Every dawn brought the same ritual, the blare of horns, the clatter of shields, the thunder of marching feet. They trained until their muscles screamed, until their minds silenced the weakness of the flesh. For in Rome, greatness was not a gift. It was earned in sweat, in scars, in sacrifice. They were taught that fear is a shadow, and that a true Roman does not run from shadows. He walks through them. The sword was not their weapon. Their mind was, their heart was, their will was, their will was. And when the enemy looked into their eyes, they did not see men. They saw inevitability. Every legend began the same way. A soldier standing on the edge of death, refusing to fall. Whether it was Scipio beneath the blazing sun of Africa, Belisarius beneath the shattered walls of Byzantium, or Trajan staring into the endless wild of Dacia, they all faced moments when defeat whispered in their ear, and every time they answered with steel. But here's the truth that the centuries try to hide. It was never the victories that made them legends. It was the pain, failures they refused to accept, the tears shed in silence before dawn, the weight of command when thousands of lives hung on a single breath. A Roman commander was not measured by how many men followed him into battle. He was measured by how many were willing to die for him, because leadership in those blood-soaked fields was not about shouting orders. It was about carrying every fallen soldier in your soul. It was about walking through carnage with your head high, knowing that the gods themselves were watching and refusing to flinch. They did not seek glory. Glory came to them, uninvited, drawn by the magnetism of purpose. And as their names spread across continents, so did the myth, the idea that Rome bred men who could not lose. But even then, beneath the weight of their triumph, they remained haunted. That was the making of a legend, not triumph, but transformation. They began as men. They became symbols, and symbols never die. Their lives became scripture for generations to come, their stories carved into marble and memory alike. To the world they were God. But to Rome, they were something greater, proof that even flesh can defy fate, that even mortal hands can sculpt eternity. So when we speak of them now, these legends who never lost a battle, we are not just remembering their victories, we are remembering the fire that built them. The crucible that broke the weak and crowned the unbreakable, the making of the invincible. War, to the untrained eye, is chaos, fire, blood, and thunder. But to Rome's greatest warriors, it was music. A rhythm composed of discipline and death, precision and power, where every strike, every maneuver, every heartbeat played its part in a masterpiece of domination. They were not just soldiers, they were architects of annihilation. They studied the art of war as if it were scripture, understanding that victory was not won by strength alone, but by the mind that wielded it. Steel without strategy is merely noise. But in the hands of a Roman commander, it became a symphony. On the fields of Cannae, when Hannibal's brilliance painted the soil red, Rome learned, and she learned fast. For she was a beast that adapted, evolved, and returned sharper. From that lesson rose men like Scipio Africanus, a warrior who studied his enemy as a poet studies silence. He turned Hannibal's own tactics against him at Zama, outthinking the thinker, outmaneuvering the master. And in doing so, he proved that Rome's genius was not bound by defeat. It was born from it. In the frozen north, legions under Trajan cut through the Dacian mountains like thunder rolling across the heavens. Each move was deliberate, each strike a calculated whisper to the gods. Rome endures. The world saw steel, Rome saw geometry. Every line of formation, every pivot, every charge was crafted with mathematical precision. To them, war was madness. It was order made manifest through blood. But perhaps their greatest weapon was not their sword nor their shield. It was unity. A Roman legion moved like a single living being, thousands of men breathing, marching, fighting as one. In that unity, chaos found its end. Enemies who stood before them felt not the presence of soldiers, but of destiny itself. Their discipline was terrifying in its beauty. Imagine the silence before the charge. No panic, no hesitation, only calm resolve. The centurion's voice cutting through the air, the glint of sunlight on polished armor, the synchronized march that shook the ground beneath their feet. It wasn't rage that drove them, it was control. The calm fury of men who had already decided the outcome before the battle began. They mastered deception as much as they mastered steel. Camouflage, feigned retreats, psychological warfare. They understood the mind of the enemy better than he understood himself. They built roads not just to move armies, but to weave the empire together like veins carrying the lifeblood of conquest. Even their fortresses, symmetrical, efficient, unyielding, mirrored the very soul of Rome, structured, unstoppable, eternal. And behind every maneuver was intellect sharpened by experience. They knew when to fight, when to wait, when to burn, when to build. They saw beyond the field, into the hearts of men, the terrain of fear, the landscape of ambition. Their wars were not accidents of chance, but the deliberate brushstrokes of minds painting on the canvas of time. When their legions marched, the world trembled, not because they were many, but because they were perfectly one. Each man, each blade, each heartbeat synchronized in a rhythm only Rome could command. And when the battle was done, when the earth was quiet and the smoke cleared, what remained was not just victory. It was proof. Proof that strategy, discipline, and unity could turn mere mortals into instruments of the divine. They were masters of steel, yes, but more than that, they were masters of the mind. And in that mastery, they found immortality. For long after their swords grew silent, their methods endured. Studied by kings, feared by enemies, worshipped by history itself. They were not men of war, they were war, made human. In the heart of every Roman victory, there was not just power, there was brotherhood. It was not marble walls or imperial gold that held the empire together. It was the bond between men, the unspoken truth that in the dust of battle you did not fight for Rome. You fought for the man standing beside you. Beneath the shining armor and the thundering drums, these warriors were not gods. They were brothers, bound not by blood but battle. Each scar on their bodies was a story shared, each victory a memory etched in the same heartbeat. They slept under the same stars, marched through the same storms, bled on the same soil. When one fell, the others carried him, not just his body, but his legacy. For to a Roman warrior, death was not the end. It was a passing of the torch, the promise that no brother's sacrifice would fade into silence. On the front lines, in the mud and the madness, rank meant nothing. The general and the foot soldier stood as one, shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, heartbeat to heartbeat. Because in war, there was no higher honor than trust, and trust was everything. Imagine a clash, swords ringing, arrows screaming, chaos consuming the earth. The soldier falters. His shield slips, but before death can find him, a hand, scarred and steady, lifts him up. No words are exchanged. None are needed. That is what brotherhood looked like. That is what made them unstoppable. That they didn't fight for glory, they fought for each other. Every legionary knew, if you fall, I fall. If you stand, I stand. That bond was the empire's greatest weapon, stronger than iron, deeper than fear, more sacred than the gods themselves. When the night came and the fires flickered low, they would sit in silence, sharing bread, sharpening blades, staring into flames that danced like memories of home. They didn't speak of victory or conquest. They spoke of families, of laughter, of promises waiting beyond the war. For even legends, when the armor came off, were still men, tired, scarred, human. But it was that humanity, them unbreakable. A legion's strength was not measured by how many stood at dawn, but by how many refused to abandon one another when darkness fell. The unity was their immortality in full, and it echoed beyond the grave. For centuries later, when historians wrote of Rome's might, they did not speak only of strategy or empire. They spoke of brotherhood, because that was Rome's true secret. It wasn't just steel that conquered the world, it was loyalty. Loyalty so fierce that it could outlast fear, silence pain, and turn ordinary men into living legends. When the battle drums stopped, when the bodies were buried, and the dust settled, those bonds endured. Some returned home. Many did not. But every man who marched beneath the eagle carried with him the memory of those who couldn't. And in that memory, Rome never truly lost a son. That brotherhood was more than an army's heartbeat. It was the soul of an empire. For when men are willing to die for one another, no force on earth can break them. And long after the legions vanished, long after the banners fell, that bond, forged in blood and fire, still whispered through time. It whispered of men who stood together when the world turned against them, of loyalty that outlived death, of a brotherhood so pure even history bowed in reverence. And so, when we speak of Rome's greatest warriors, we do not just speak of soldiers, we speak of brothers, united by purpose, sealed by sacrifice, immortalized by love that no battlefield could destroy. Time is the one enemy even empires cannot conquer. Stone crumbles, gold fades, the roar of armies becomes the whisper of wind. But some things, some names defy the silence. They live on, not in the monuments they built, but in the fire they left behind. Rome's greatest warriors are gone. Their bones long turned to dust, their banners swallowed by centuries. Yet their legacy, their spirit, still walks among us. It lingers in every soldier who stands his ground, in every leader who refuses to yield, in every soul who dares to believe that purpose can outlast pain. Because what they built was never just an empire of stone. It was an empire of ideals, courage, duty, brotherhood. The unshakable belief that men united by something greater than themselves can shape destiny with their bare hands. Their victories may have ended with the setting of Rome's sun, but their lessons did not. They became whispers in the wind, carried through centuries, finding new hearts to awaken. Every time history called for strength, it was their echo that answered. Every time the world demanded courage, it was their fire that returned. For the true power of a legacy is not that it is remembered, it is that it continues to create. Their tactics shaped the art of war for generations. Their discipline became the foundation of armies across continents. Their unity inspired nations, their courage fueled revolutions, and even in peace their presence remained. In the laws we live by, the roads beneath our feet, the will that drives us to build, to endure, to rise again. The great warriors of Rome understood something the world still struggles to learn. That greatness is not measured by how long you live, but by what refuses to die after you're gone. Their legacy was not carved by victory alone, but by conviction, the unrelenting belief that fate belongs to those willing to seize it, that no man, no empire, no dream is ever truly gone, as long as someone remembers why it mattered. So when we stand in the shadow of time and speak their names, Scipio, Trajan, Belisarius, Caesar, we are not merely recalling history, we are awakening it. Because their story was never about conquest, it was about endurance, about the immortal spirit that refuses to be buried. You can still feel it in the ruins of their cities, in the dust of their roads, in the bloodline of our courage. That Roman spirit, defiant, disciplined, eternal, it still breathes through us. It reminds us that defeat is never final, that strength is born in unity, that the flame of purpose once lit can burn through the darkness of 1,000 ages. And that is their true victory. Not the battles they won, nor the empires they built, but the idea they left behind. An idea that mankind could be unstoppable if only it stood together. So as the centuries march on and new empires rise and fall, their legacy endures, not in the dust of their monuments, but in the hearts of those who dare to believe, as they once did, that destiny favors the brave. The legends who never lost a battle may have vanished into history, but their spirit never did, because Rome's greatest warriors did not fight for glory. They fought to prove a truth that time itself could never erase, that courage is eternal, and that the legacy of the undefeated never dies. And so, as the final torch flickers against the night and the echoes of Rome fade into the distance of time, one truth remains: greatness is not born from power. It is born from purpose. The warriors of Rome, the men who never knew defeat, did not conquer the world merely with swords. They conquered it with conviction, with unity, with the kind of courage that does not fade when the battle ends. Look back at them not as relics of history, but as mirrors. Because what lived in them, that relentless will, that brotherhood, that hunger to rise when the world says a fall, still lives in you. The question is not whether you can fight like them. The question is whether you can endure. Whether you can face your own wars, the silent ones, the unseen ones, and refuse to yield. For every man and woman walks their own battlefield. Some fight with swords, some with faith, some with dreams that the world will never understand. But the spirit that wins, that never bows, never breaks, never surrenders, that spirit is the same that built Rome. So stand tall wherever you are. Let the world hear your footsteps as they once heard the march of the legions. Carry your purpose like a shield. Face your fears like an enemy at the gates. And remember, victory is not the absence of struggle. It is the refusal to quit. You are not so different from them. You are forged by your trials, tested by your pain, defined by your choices. And when the dust settles on your life's field, what will matter is not how many battles you fought, but how many you refused to lose. So rise as they did, with fire in your heart and iron in your will. Let the world see through you that the Roman spirit never died. Because as long as there are those who fight for something greater than themselves, Rome still stands, and history, your history, is waiting to be written.